Oh, hi, this is Jim Arnold. Sorry I'm a little awkward using this computer camera. I don't do it too often, but I did want to make a little memorial statement for Tim. I am sorry I can't make it up to Oregon for the memorial for Tim Manion on Sunday. I live in Los Angeles, but I did want to leave something so that you would know, his other friends would know what the younger Tim was like if you didn't know him way back then, like I did. Um, so yeah, my name is Jim Arnold, and Tim Manion and I were, what you might call BFFs or something like that. Although we certainly didn't use that term back then. From the end of high school to maybe age 25 or so, we both went to Marquette High School in Milwaukee, which is an all boys Catholic high school, and I think I met Tim my senior year. We were at a retreat, which we had to do once per year, and Tim had some, I guess you'd call it contraband. It's legal now, but it certainly wasn't then. But he invited me to get high with him on this religious retreat, and of course, who am I to say no? So that was the first time I met him, even though we had been going to the same school for about 3.5 years at that point, but I didn't know him. But after that, of course, everything changed, and he had a remarkable effect on my young life. And I wanted to point that out to his friends in Salem and other people that knew us, who obviously knew that and knew him back then. Um, but I'm gay, as was Tim, and I wasn't really, I don't think, 100% out to myself at that point in my senior year of high school. But Tim, if you knew Tim, you knew that he was an original. I think there is a God. I think she threw away that mold after she made Tim, because there's certainly no other person like that. But he lived his life, according to his own drummer, and he was very much an out there kind of person. And I learned a great deal from him very quickly when we first met. So he was, I guess you could call it, my introduction to the whole world of gay culture and specifically camp. It was through Tim that I learned about David Bowie, that I learned about Andy Warhol, that I learned about John Waters and his films with Divine. Um, all of that stuff, which was kind of going on in the counterculture in 1972, 1973 when we met. And he was the first person I realized was an actual gay person that I knew, other than there was a guy who took the tickets at the local theater that we went to, and there was Lance Loud, who was on TV in the documentary series. What was it called? The Family, an American Family, I think, that was on PBS. And they lived in Santa Barbara. And Lance was their oldest son, and he was the gay one, and he talked about that. But other than that, in real life, I didn't know too many people, and was not about ready to make that realization or admission to myself. But I did, shortly after that, and Tim made that a whole lot easier. Um, he showed me where my first gay bar was. He kind of took me into that world under his wing, and not really providing instruction, but he certainly made it a lot easier with his humor and the way he looked at life. It just, you would laugh about everything when I would think everything was so serious, and still do to some extent. But Tim was Tim, and there was always room for a lot of frivolity there. So he made it a lot easier for me to come out, even if I didn't do that in kind of the formal way they do now with family members and everything, to myself and to the culture that we lived in the Midwest. And he made that whole process a lot easier for me. And yes, introduced me to writers I never had known about, like Tennessee Williams, and Gore Vidal was one of his favorites. I remember, other people kind of that gay literary demi-monde like Jean Genet, and again, Andy Warhol and his movies, things like that. And so I'm forever grateful for Tim for introducing me to that world. which my first taste of it. Did not know about that stuff at the Arnold household, and who knows how long it would have been before I got to know that stuff if Tim hadn't introduced me to it. We were, like I said, friends during that really important time between end of high school and end of college, really. We kind of lost touch with each other when I moved to California in 1981. Although we saw each other sporadically over the next couple of decades, it wasn't anything like it had been previously. And, we would get into, these kind of unbelievable scrapes that, young guys do, young gay guys do. And, we often refer to ourselves as Lucy and Ethel. I think I was Lucy, he was Ethel. Or maybe it was the other way around, or maybe it kind of went back and forth. I'm not really sure. But, it was crazy. It was drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And, he would be the first to tell you that, which was great. We loved it. We loved it. It was a crazy time in the mid to late 70s, before the advent of AIDS and other things that kind of put a damper on kind of that crazy world of, the mid to late 70s, early 80s. Our friendship continued when he went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I stayed in Milwaukee for most of that part of my life. I went to Marquette University, although I did go to Madison for a year, and we were roommates for a brief period in a house that later on, I realized had been owned by a future relative of mine, so that was kind of a crazy thing. And again, just a lot of fun, a lot of partying, and a lot of really good times. I, knew the whole Manion family. I know Tim was the last person to survive out of his family, but I knew his parents, and his mother particularly well, and his grandmother, who they called Gaga. Way before Lady Gaga, there was the Manion Gaga, and his brother, not well, but I knew his sister Kathy very well. She also lived with us for a short time in Madison, and even though Tim and I never dated romantically, we were very close friends. And like I said, if that term had been around then, BFFs would have been appropriate. And I loved him, and I loved this time I spent with him. Like I said, he lived life according to his own script. He did what he wanted, and it was very unconventional. I always really admired him for that. He, not that I would have always made the choices that he made for himself, but that philosophy of being, your own person and being true to yourself, and living the life that you truly wanted to live, which I think ties in very much with why he moved to Oregon and what he wanted to do there in Salem. And I was grateful that the last couple of years ago, I have a friend who had moved to the outskirts of Portland, and I went up to see him, and I got the chance to visit him for an afternoon in Salem, and he took me to I think it's a farmer's market that was right across the street from his apartment building, and took me for a walk through the campus of Willamette College? I think that's what it is, and where the state capitol is, and the river and the parks over there. And, we had a great time. So the last time that I saw him, which was that time, was a really, really wonderful experience. So again, I'm sorry I can't be there today for the memorial, but I hope it's a great one. And I know it will be because, Tim's spirit will be there. And also wish that I had the chance to meet all of his friends there. Thank you, David, for putting this all together. And I guess I'll just say goodbye. I love Tim. I don't know where he is now, but wherever that is, I imagine that he's laughing and happy. So that does my heart good, and hope it will be the same for you. Okay. Thank you, and goodbye from LA.